Time for us to check in with CTV tech analyst Carmi Levy, talk about a couple of stories in tech this week. Carmi, let's start off with the continuing saga, if you will, of TikTok. Now, this applies to the U.S., although we know that in Canada, right, if you're a government employee, you're not supposed to have access to TikTok, I think. Mm-hmm. But in the U.S., the issue here was politicians, of course, deciding they're going to ban this as of next January. But for the 100 and some odd million people just in the U.S., who are on TikTok, many of them, making money off it. They're not happy about this. So where are we now?
So where we're at now is that the company that owns TikTok, ByteDance, they said they were going to fight this tooth and nail. And in fact, that's exactly what they're doing. They have launched a lawsuit. They're suing the U.S. government to force them to drop plans to implement this law, basically saying it's unconstitutional, that it affects Americans' First Amendment rights, that it affects their freedom of expression, contravenes the Constitution, and they will fight it on those grounds. They said they were going to sue, so this is no surprise. What I would expect next is an injunction as well, which essentially allows them to freeze the clock, so to speak, while they prepare their case. Because right now, of course, we're looking at next January. There's a 9-month period that the company has to be able to sell its American resources. And if it doesn't sell within that time frame, then they could be forced to shut down by this law. So if this court case goes ahead and they get an injunction, they can kind of freeze the clock and then battle it out in court and then hopefully stay alive that way. But, you mentioned this is a multi-billion-dollar economy. There are hundreds of thousands of Americans who that is their job. I think about 250,000 Americans, in fact, by the latest estimates, who their career is TikTok, generating huge amounts of revenue as well as income. So, you essentially shut that down if the app goes dark, and the company has said, we're not going to take this sitting down, we're going to sue you, and that's where we're at now.
Yeah, and we're talking about a Chinese company who would sue the U.S. government. This is going to be a really interesting case if and when it gets to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is unprecedented. We've never seen a Chinese company kind of take on the Department of Justice in this way. This is more than just a court battle, really. This is a geopolitical battle between China and the U.S., and they're kind of using TikTok almost as a proxy. So it really is unprecedented here in a North American context. Of course, we had seen similar bans proposed in India, for example, a few years back. They actually successfully banned the app. And if you go to India, you cannot use TikTok, can't download it, can't access it, and citizens there have found other platforms to share their videos on. If you live in Montana, they also enacted a law that would ban TikTok, but what's happening there is the company also fought back and is challenging that in court. And so right now, they're kind of on hold. And what's interesting is what is happening in Montana could set something of a precedent for what happens nationally. And of course, while all that plays out, even though none of this legislative action affects Canadians directly, it does affect us indirectly, because there are a lot of Canadians who use TikTok, including a lot of Canadian influencers who are also building their careers, Canadian businesses that use it for marketing and for selling stuff. So a lot of their audience is based south of the border. Whatever happens there will ripple over the border, whether we like it or not.
All right. Speaking of spam, if you have been bombarded with spam texts, and this is fascinating because I don't know why, but in the last, month or so, I've gotten more spam than ever before. And apparently it's not just me. This is a problem that's getting worse, and in Canada.
Yeah, you're definitely not imagining it, Aaron. I'm noticing it myself. I'm hearing from a lot of people who are saying exactly the same thing, that this has been going on for years, of course, but the volume, the intensity of it really does seem to be on a very steep curve upward. And so data from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, the National Spam Reporting Centre, the Canadian Telecommunications Association, even the CRTC, they're all reporting that volumes of spam are going up. A lot of it is tied to what we call seasonality. So we just came through tax season. A lot of the spam, the fraudulent messages that we're seeing in our email inboxes, text inboxes, social media, were about taxes, because, of course, that's what we're focused on. So the topic changes based on what's most likely to get us to believe that it really is the CRA trying to reach us. Also, at the same time, we are seeing a lot of ticket scams. We're coming into summer music season and festival season. A lot of scammers are trying to sell us things online, except when we click on that link, we're not buying a ticket. We have just infected ourselves with ransomware. Same thing with employment scams. Unemployment is going up. People looking for jobs, they're seeing messages like this. the bottom line is you're going to be seeing a lot of messages from organizations, government agencies, companies, banks that claim to be legitimate. Lean in closely, because no one uses text messages to say you owe this payment or here's a job, click on this link.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. We've got to be more cynical. We have to resist the urge to click on that link, because that's what gets us into trouble. And in fact, those numbers, they're bad now. They're only going to get worse with time.
Yeah, by the way, Amazon is not spelled with AMASON, in case you get one of those. All right, let me move on. And speaking of spam, this is sort of the same idea, right? Dangerous rise of GPS attacks. That's become ubiquitous for people as well, right? Everybody uses GPS. Now what do you have to watch out for here?
You got to GPS relies on a reliable connection with GPS satellites in the sky. It is a service that can be jammed, and we're seeing a rising number of reports from both the Baltic region, so around Ukraine, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Germany, where airplanes are reporting that their GPS is showing them half a country over. Cars are also showing erroneous readings. Navigation isn't working as it should. We're also seeing it in Israel, in and around the Gaza Strip area, as well as the entire Middle East region, where militaries, both the U.S., Israel, in Russia, the Russians, of course, are using it. Ukraine is using it against Russia. They're using it to spoof the weapons, the GPS-guided weapons, that would find their target using GPS signals. Of course, it affects everyone else's ability to get around too. And so this has been going on since last summer, or even before, frankly, since when Russia went into Ukraine. But it's getting worse as the techniques get further refined. Of course, we're not seeing it to the same degree here in Canada, obviously, but I think this is a warning to all of us. GPS is a critical national service. It can be compromised anywhere on the planet, and we owe it to ourselves to have a plan B. In other words, if GPS doesn't work, how do we get around? Those old maps, the paper maps that we used to keep in our glove compartment, we may want to pull them out and put them back in, because we may need them if the service does go dark.
I still have some of those, which come in handy. I would ask one thing, though. How would you even know if your GPS, I mean, obviously, if you're a pilot, you know where you are, but how would the average person know if their GPS has been hacked?
Because you will actually see. So, for example, you can see on GPS exactly where you are at any given point, overlaid over a map. And so just look outside, look to your surroundings, look at your map. And if there's any major difference between them, GPS is usually accurate, so within a couple of meters. Obviously, that gets a little bit more challenging when you're downtown between the towers. Right. Sometimes it's problematic. But if you are a few miles away from where you're supposed to be, that is a problem. You might want to consider switching to some other method of navigation. Of course, if you're a pilot, you don't just have GPS. You have other forms of navigational aids that pilots know to use. And so air safety is not being affected here. Pilots have been issued notifications. They're prepared for this. But for all of us, we very blindly turn the navigation app on and don't really give it much thought. I think this is a reminder that we should start giving it some thought. Pay closer attention to what your GPS is telling you. It may not necessarily be 100% right.
All right, and we will leave it there. Carmi, thank you so much.
Great being with you, Aaron. Thank you.